Hello, fellow readers. Today I have a book to talk about that really took me by surprise and, in a certain way, complements a lot of the other stuff that I've been reading lately, more than I realized it would when I started it. The book Thank You, Mr. Nixon by Chinese-American author Gish Jen is a collection of fictional short stories featuring the intersection of Chinese and American culture over the past 50 years, with a diverse assortment of characters that I found enjoyable without exception, all in their own different ways. The book's title might seem to suggest a direct historical or political focus, but that's not really the case. Yes, you'll see some of that here, since after all, it's probably impossible to talk about interactions between Chinese and Chinese Americans anytime in the past century, really, without that historical context seeping in. But that context is not really what these stories are fully about. It's merely a setting in which we can observe ordinary Chinese and Chinese American characters navigating their complicated identities, including familial and cultural expectations, which are continually evolving with the passing of time and the birth of new generations and new social and cultural norms. I learned about this collection from an interview with the author Gish Jen on the Politics and Prose bookstore channel. I'll link that interview below since I found it delightful and it really piqued my interest. I actually watched it twice, once before and once after reading. And then it was on my radar and, well, I hadn't been planning on reading it immediately, but for whatever reason, I just felt one morning I was in the mood for it and found an audiobook version of it, so I just spontaneously decided to go for it. So the collection features 11 stories that span from, I guess, 1972 through 2022. In fact, maybe part of why it worked so well within the context of my reading is that it picks up right around the time where one of my recent reads, Wild Swans, which I've now posted my review on, left off. Though that book was a historical personal account, while these stories are fiction, and the tone of this collection is markedly different than Wild Swans. Not all the stories take place in China, although many of them do partially, if not fully. And as I already mentioned, all of them in some way focus on characters with some sort of Chinese identity or cultural link to China, as well as some sort of cultural link to America as well. In 1972, President Richard Nixon of the United States visited China along with his wife and U.S. First Lady, Pat Nixon, a visit that was hugely symbolic for both Chinese and Americans, as there really had been no such diplomatic visits for decades beforehand. But in the future, it would become much more of the norm for U.S. presidents to visit China at some point during their tenure. So Nixon's visit, in retrospect, signals the advent of a new era of relations between the U.S. and China. And this relationship would and still does face plenty of challenges on both a geopolitical and a personal level, but it was sort of the beginning of an era of China's opening up to the West and even dabbling in elements of capitalism with Chinese characteristics, and at the same time, this is pretty vague, but as I understand it, there's an increasing interest for some Americans in modern China and Chinese culture. And I mean both of these things not only entirely in a positive sense, but in really a complicated sense with benefits and drawbacks for both nations and the people living in them. So this book explores the mutual opening up of these two cultures, along with the hurdles that's involved, all through really entertaining tales of fictional personal experiences. The stories are, I think, entirely in chronological order, starting with a woman who's writing from heaven to President Nixon, who is, of course, in hell. And yes, this is all written in a wonderful tongue-in-cheek style. And this Chinese woman, she knows on paper what wrongs Nixon has done, but she genuinely has a hard time reconciling this with the inspiration that she herself gained when Nixon visited China. In particular, this character absolutely adored seeing U.S. First Lady Pat Nixon's red coat that she wore during her visit to China, so much that in years to come we learned she would enter into the coat manufacturing industry. It's really adorable hearing this character talk about just how much she loves coats. And from there we progress forward in time to a selection of other stories, most of them not directly related to one another, but all having some overlapping characters who often play a minor role in some earlier story, and then will come back to play a bigger role later on. And the stories really do complement one another perfectly in spirit. It doesn't in any way feel like just a hodgepodge of stories that the author decided to stack together for convenience, even though they were written, as I understand, over a period of many years. Something about the overall tone, the mood of this book was just perfect for me right now. Not all the stories have the same mood, by the way, but there is an unmistakable commonality in the tone that underlies all of them. They feel mostly lighthearted and not too serious, with little sprinkles of humor throughout that reinforce this tone. Yet in the midst of this humor, they're often really moving in a way that is impossible to miss, but also genuine and never in your face or feeling forced. So I guess before I mention anything else about the stories themselves, I'll say that I really like this collection. I found it the best thing I've read so far this year, at least in April at the time I'm filming this video, and it's very easy to read, but I think Gish Jen achieves that readability without sacrificing too much in overall depth. And it really pleasantly surprised me because, I mean, of course I hoped I'd like it, but I just knew pretty little about it, and I didn't expect quite how much I'd appreciate it. So, for a little more detail about what you'll find inside, Gish Jen paints a very entertaining cast of characters in this collection. There are some who will be inherently more admirable and others who will make us groan, yet even the less likable characters will eventually evoke our empathy at times. Through her witty writing style, Gish Jen manages to caricaturize certain aspects of characters without dehumanizing them, allowing us to both laugh at them and empathize with them at the same time. For example, one white American couple from Cincinnati, Ohio, will have readers cringing at the way they exoticize and then clash with Chinese culture in their business dealings, yet even they are written in a way that isn't too othering. Like, we might not really like them, but we've all been there too, and we can see their point of view and the genuine emotion behind their actions, however misguided it might be. So in the end, maybe it does allow us to see a bit of ourselves in them. So what else can you look forward to in this book? Well, just to give you a taste of the stories, after our introductory letter thanking President Nixon, we'll follow a mixed-race couple vacationing in China with the wife's Chinese-born mother, who was quickly nominated as the American tour group's de facto tour guide and translator. This is a vibrant story that feels a little bit like a vacation and a historical tour in itself, but with a certain element of seriousness too, as the mother Opal experiences a lot of feelings that she's never quite had the chance to process since leaving China and her family there many years ago. A touching story, and it was after this one that I already suspected I was really going to appreciate this entire collection. Then we have a Chinese-American man who's considered a failure by his parents and just about everyone else in the US, but then becomes an esteemed foreign expert when he goes to work in China, and perhaps he'll even find love there. Next, the white American couple that I mentioned before tries to set up a tea shop, I believe in Cincinnati, importing premium Chinese tea from the Yunnan region, but some cultural differences lead to unexpected results. Then in the shortest story in the book, almost just an interlude, a mother hatches a plan to make sure her son won't end up marrying someone who she feels is not quite good enough for him. Interestingly, in this one, we don't ever know enough about the son or his girlfriend to really form anything more than a superficial opinion of them, and probably not all that positive an opinion of either one, surely no better than lukewarm. Next, some Hong Kong helicopter parents try to track down their uncommunicative daughter, the first of 3 children, who seems to have her phone turned off whenever mom calls. I especially enjoy this one for the characters of the parents who really come to life in full color. After that, a law student tries to help his talented friend, who he also has a bit of a liking for, overcome her natural reticence to score an interview at a major law firm. Then there's the most quietly touching story in the book about a middle-aged woman who's called in to take care of her slightly younger friend's grandfather, while that friend's away helping orphans in Zambia or something like that. But don't worry, that's about as unsubtle of a point as it's going to get in this entire collection of short stories. From there, we have another memorable story about a woman who makes beautiful art inspired by the painter Mark Rothko. Tributes, you could say, imitations, knockoffs, scams. We see how devoted she is to her not that lucrative craft, the care she takes to get these paintings just perfect and to embody even the artistic spirit of Rothko himself as she performs or paints. And after that, we have yet another standout story that combines humor with empathy in describing the experiences of an immigrant who I think is in the US on an expired visa, though a certain lawyer from one of our previous stories is trying to help sort things out here. This story is a strange but satisfying experience, as it is at sometimes really funny, but also difficult to see what this woman and her family go through. And then we finally cap off the collection with Detective Dog, an entertaining crowd pleaser written in the time of COVID that Gish Jen described in the interview with Politics and Prose as the reason why she won't be allowed to travel to China in the near future. Here, through the lens of a young 9-year-old boy pretending to be a dog detective for a school mystery writing assignment, we investigate the case of a missing person who happens to be his mother's sister, Aunt Bobby, who we learn became active in protest movements in Hong Kong. So I'll leave it with that, with those very brief teasers of what you can expect to see should you read this book. And you should read this book. I say this more confidently than any other book I've read this year. I highly recommend this collection for just about anyone, as it will teach you, challenge your preconceptions, make you laugh, expand your empathy, and warm your heart. Thank you, Mr. Nixon by Gish Jen, the best thing I've read so far this year. So pick it up right now. Don't forget to watch the interview with the author, which will really enhance your experience, I think. And happy reading.